Welcome to another Sew As They Grow pattern. This one is the Banian top. In India, Banian means singlet. I like the fact that the side seams, well, they're just not there, they're in the back. Drafting the pattern. 2 pieces to the pattern, front and a back. Choose your size. Use Violin to draw your draft pattern. You can see through it, write on it with a Bic pen. Make sure you show the straight grain, and on the back panel it can go both ways, so you can use patterns. Cutting the fabric. Lay your fabric down with the selvage next to you, fold it over, and the front is cut on the fold. Pin it all the way around, and then we're going to cut it and cut those curves nicely because that impacts on the finished product, giving you the best look. Make sure you cut right up to the edge of your draft pattern, and you also show the markings such as the waist on the side seam. Lovely curved hem, and we're cutting one back on the fold, so we've got a nice light pink and an extremely bright pink for this pattern. And again, cut them very close to your pattern draft, especially that back armhole. The whole impact to give it that racer back look depends on that cutting. And again, on your side seam, cut out the marking. And then we're going to cut 3 pieces of bias binding. And in this instance, we've decided to use the bright pink for the binding rather than the dull pink. And we cut it on a 45-degree angle so that it's got its maximum stretch as we apply it to the neckline. And we just want to check the bias length against the neck and armhole openings. Doesn't matter whether the seams are there or not. And here we've got an example of playing with the stripes in the back panel. First sewing step is the shoulder seam. We're going to have the right sides facing. We're going to pin one shoulder, the front, to a matching back shoulder. And we're going to sew that from the neck to the armhole opening. We're using zigzag. When I ever start a seam, I hold that thread so that it doesn't pull out and make a big mess that you have to unpick. The less unpicking, the better. Secure the seam at the beginning and end, and trim those threads so that your work's tidy. And if you're good, you'll even put them in the rubbish. We can press that shoulder seam towards the front or just pin it. The next step is the neck opening. Now we're going to stay stitch the neckline so that it doesn't stretch as we add the binding. Have your foot close to the edge of the fabric, longest stitch length, I use a 5, and follow the curve slowly. I'd like to say that I've actually got this on fast speed, but no, that's how I sew. Now we've done the stay stitching, so we're going to pin the bias binding, the longest one, to the neck edge, and we have a slight stretch as we do this. It's not the excessive tightness that one could get when we stretch the fabric, just a slight stretch, and you pin it every 3 or so centimetres around the neckline. And then we're going to attach the neckline with a 0.5 centimetre seam width, and that gives you a nice width to your binding at the neck. Secure the seam at the beginning and slowly go around and move the fabric out of the way. Once you start to have quite a curved seam, your fabric would like to go under there and get caught up, so that it's a nice mistake you have to fix, but you don't want that. So you move the fabric out as you go along, taking your time. Better to sew it once than several times trying to fix it. Take your pins out as you go, you don't want to sew over those. And once you've finished, we're going to do a nice secure back stitch at the end of the seam. We want to remove the stay stitching. I always use my unpicker if I can't get to it when it's a zigzag seam, and just keep going until you haven't got it. Clip the neckline every 1 to 2 centimeters. This helps to reduce the tension in the neckline and makes folding over that bias look better. And we're going to trim the seam triangle as we go as well, so that it's not bulky in the neckline. And next we're going to attach the other front to the back. Put your pin in at 1 centimeter at the seam line so that you match up and your end result is very tidy and it's not out of line. So from the neck to the armhole again, secure your seam, trim those edges and trim off the excess binding. And as you've just done in the neck edge before, trim off the triangle of that seam to reduce the bulk. Let's see how perfect it was. So you open it up and perfectly lined up. So there's our neck edge all clipped, and trimming those seams at the shoulders helps to give you a better look when you fold over your binding. So you can fold the binding over your seam all the way around, so you're folding it to the wrong side. Start with your shoulders first, you might then go to your centre back and centre front, pin them down, pin all the way around, and you're ready to do your top stitching when we're at that point. Next sewing step is the armhole seam, and again we're going to have to stay stitch that opening so that it doesn't stretch when we're applying the binding, especially on the back panel because it's such tight curve. Make sure that the shoulder seam is still facing the front when you go over it. Okay, so you're going to pin the binding to the armhole as you did for the neck opening with that slight stretch. The front armhole is a nice curve, whereas the back armhole is a bit of a tighter curve. So you might want to pin the back binding at a more regular interval of maybe every 2 centimeters to help with that tight curve that's happening. Let's give it a slight stretch, pin it, and just carry on around the armhole. The back armhole panel piece is quite small, but it's quite effective. And then we're going to sew the binding to the armhole, secure the seam at the beginning, slowly go round and again pull out the body of the top as you go so that you don't have any tucks of fabric in the seam, and take your time going around because it's such a curved seam. You don't want to make errors and have to do it again, especially unpicking zigzag stitch. It's a bit of a pain. And then when you get to the end of the seam, you want to secure the end of it with a couple of back stitches in zigzag. The next thing we're going to do is again remove the stay stitching, clip the arm opening every 1 to 2 centimeters, probably every 1 centimeter on the back one. Measure down 1 centimeter of that side seam, put a pin in, match it with the opposing side seam, and that way you should get a nice perfect join. And you're going to pin at the lower edge, the waist marking, and that armhole seam of the front and back panels. And we'll be sewing the seam from the lower edge to the armhole so that the armhole seam allowance goes into the binding. Pins are your friends. They're trying to help you make the best success at your sewing. Right, so we're sewing that side seam, secure it at the beginning with zigzag. Slowly going up because it is another slight curved seam. These two edges of the back and the front top help to give shape to the back of the top and make it nice and slim and snug, not like the basic t-shirt, which is something to move in, I guess. This is something to look good in. And if you wanted to, you could make it into a little crop top, and it could be a swimming tog top. Right, we've secured the end, trimmed the threads, cutting off the excess binding. We're going to trim those corners of the armhole seam so it's less bulk. And now you can either choose to have your seam all going to the back, or you can open it up to reduce the bulk even more as you fold over your binding towards the wrong side and pin it all the way around. And so we're going to pin all our sleeve bindings so we're ready to top stitch. And the good thing about this is as you do it, you can see threads coming through, and that was a bit of the stay stitching that was still in. Now we're going to top stitch the neckline and the armholes. We can do this with zigzag, the running stitch, or twin needle, and we're top stitching on the right side of the fabric. When I use the twin needle, I use my blind foot, which has like a arm in the middle that keeps you on your center, and I run this along the seam of the armhole or the neck where the bias joins to the body, and it gives you a straight stitch on either side of that line, that seam line, and it's tidy as and looks exactly like I've bought it from a shop in a manufacturing cover stitch look, so it's pretty cool. I live by it, but some people like to use stretch stitch for their hems and top stitching, which is fine. You use what you're used to, what you like, what works. So always trim those threads, and then we're going to cut away the excess binding from the wrong side carefully, and I mean carefully because it's so easy to nip the fabric underneath. Have your scissors on a bit of an angle as you trim away. And now we're sewing the armholes, and you're going to do exactly the same with the hem. Remember to pin it 1.5 centimeters and top stitch it. So always press your seams on the wrong side. Makes it look better. It seems to have a memory once you've done that in the fabric. And here's some examples of the Banian top. The one we sewed today, the front and the bright back panel. Then we've got different patterns running different ways.